Evelyn Louise Elmore, and I was born March the 13th, 1936, to Clifford and Valma Traylor Elmore. And the location was south of Decatur, about an hour, at Donaldson, Illinois, which is near Hillsboro, Illinois. My parents, when I was born, to my mother and dad, months later, and I'm not, some of the details, I guess I should have asked more questions during my childhood and older years. But anyway, I was told by my grandparents that my mother, my afterbirth, she was never real strong health-wise, and then she developed TB. And it came to the point where my dad, he was a milk truck driver, and it came to the point where she needed more care than what he really could do holding his job as a truck driver on a milk route. And my grandparents, her parents, that I call mothers and pop, that was my grandparents, but I called them mother and pop. They took my mother and myself into their home to care for her because of her health. And then she died when I was 18 months old. And from them taking care of me as an infant to that point, pretty much, I continued staying with them. And my dad still cared for me as a father and supported me till I graduated from high school. Financially, he still supported me. And but I really was raised by my grandparents. I would always go every summer to my dad's, and for 2 or 3 weeks throughout the summer, and I saw him, from time to time, frequently. But I really was raised in the home of my grandparents on a farm, which was in mile-wise, I'm not sure, maybe 30, 40 miles, maybe 30 miles from where I was born, south of Hillsboro. But they lived on a farm north of Greenville. And so I lived there with my grandparents, and really they were the ones that raised me. And I had an Aunt B, that, which was my mother's sister. She had a brother, Wilbur. He was my uncle. So my grandparents had 3 children. My mother was the oldest, and then my Uncle Wilbur, and then this Aunt B, and she lived in Decatur. And she played a large role as far as being a very special aunt in my life. And I had material things that I wouldn't have had otherwise had it not been for my Aunt B, like my first bike, for instance, and things like that. My dad remarried when I was, I think, 4. I don't really remember the first time that I met my stepmother, but I had a good stepmother, and they were married, I'd have to look it up on paper, many, many years. And they lived in the house, I think, that my dad and my mother did at a short time. And then he gave up being a milk truck driver and took a job with Standard Oil in Wood River, Illinois. And that's when he and my stepmother moved to Wood River. And that's where I remember them always living, was in Wood River. Okay, I went to a one-room country school. First through 12 grades was all in this one schoolroom. Had a neighbor girl, Paulina, and we had about a mile to school. Did a lot of walking to school. She was my friend from childhood, and then there was a couple other neighbor girls, but they didn't live quite as close. Lived on the farm until 1949, when my grandfather had a heart attack. And then my grandmother, she never drove. So within a year, less than a year, she and I moved to Decatur and lived with my Uncle Wilbur and Aunt Esther for some time, and then my grandmother bought a house, and so she and I lived together in Decatur. Well, I lived there till I got married, and I had a bike on the farm. She bought me my first bike, so Paulina and I rode bikes a lot. We really didn't, with not having transportation, I was limited as to what activities or what I could join or be in 4-H or anything like that, because my grandmother didn't drive. So we didn't stay on the farm too long, just the two of us. We had a neighbor that took us to church every Sunday, and usually on Wednesday night. As far as hobbies and things like that on the farm, I really didn't have. I mean, we had a dog named Old Don, and of course, my grandmother had chickens and things like that, and I had chores to do and that type of thing. But I really didn't have any hobbies, or I wasn't involved in 4-H or anything like that as far as I lived on the farm. Mm-mm. Favorite Christmas present growing up? I don't, of course, compared to what kids get nowadays, it was very limited, but I remembered dolls was one thing that I always had dolls. And I spent a lot of time playing with my dolls, yeah. I met my husband Fred through a friend of mine. She lived in an apartment at my grandmother's home, and he was going to Milliken, and she lived in that apartment upstairs, and borrowed my typewriter to do some typing for him. And she had been dating previously someone by the name of Bob, but at that time they were broke up, so she was seeing Fred a little bit. And then she went back dating Bob again. And in the meantime, I was introduced to Fred through Ann. Her name was Ann. And so I really met Fred through Ann, my friend Ann. Years later, she ended up marrying Bob, and I ended up marrying Fred. Well, our wedding was always an interesting. In fact, the lady that played the organ at our wedding, she is still in my Sunday school class at church, and I've known her since I started going there. She was playing the organ as I was going down the aisle, and we had two friends that were at that time the movie cameras, with all the bulbs and things on the movie cameras, and we had two different friends that were taking pictures with the movie cameras, and they both turned them on at the same time as she was playing the wedding march, and the power went out. She got quick thinking. She immediately went over to the piano, and she was able to finish the wedding march. But the Lord's Prayer was supposed to be sang as our final song, and that wasn't able to be sung because Janet hadn't practiced it with the piano and everything, so that wasn't. But otherwise, our wedding was like it was supposed to be. But Beverly still laughs about, yeah, I played at Evelyn's wedding and the power went out on the organ. So that was something in her life that had never happened before either. And she has shared. I've heard her tell that story different times, but it still took place and everything. Mm-hmm. We went to a place called the Wagon Wheel. It was near Rockford. It was near Rockford, Illinois, which is north of Decatur. And it's a lodge. My aunt and uncle used to go to Wisconsin, Aunt Bee, and Uncle Dick, her husband. They used to go to Wisconsin fishing every year, and that's where they would stay as they went to Wisconsin. So we knew about that Wagon Wheel Lodge, and that's where we went on our honeymoon. And then we went on up to Milwaukee, and somewhere, I don't know what the name of it was. Now I don't remember, but there was some place that we took a boat. They put the car and everything on this boat, and we went from one location to the other. Because I know Fred had a Chevy convertible, and I was worried about the weight of that car being put on that boat, and he assured me it was okay. We weren't the first ones, and we weren't the only ones, that this had been done for a long time. So I remember we went from one location to another, and that's how we spent some time up in the Milwaukee area, and then came back to Decatur. When we got married, he still had 2 years of college at Millikan. He was a junior. And so because I was already working at Borg Warner, and like I say, I worked there until 6 weeks before Jerry was born. So then he, after he graduated, he worked for Illinois Power, and then we were transferred to Granite City, which is now closer to St. Louis. And Carol was born in a hospital Jerry was born in Decatur, and Carol was born in Granite City at St. Elizabeth Hospital. And we lived down there, I don't know, 2 years or something like that. And it was getting to the place where he wasn't that happy with his job down there. So made contact back to Decatur, and was able to get a job at General Electric. So we moved back to Decatur and worked at he worked at General Electric until they closed. And then it turned out that, of course, he was without a job, and he was able to work in Springfield for a year. So he drove back and forth Alice Fiat, for a year in Springfield. And our neighbor, just over the fence behind our yard, their yard connected with our yard, I had worked with that gentleman, Ted, at Borg Warner when I worked there. And he was still at Borg Warner in engineering. And his wife just said one day something about, was Fred still working in Springfield? I said, yeah. I said, he's hoping to find something local. And she said, well, Ted says they're going to be hiring someone in the engineering at Borg Warner. And so maybe he needs to check that out. Well, he did, and he got the job there. It changed hands a couple times, and it ended up being taken over with by basically Japanese people. And he made 2 trips to Japan, which were, the time he was there 2 weeks, really took a toll on him. Not only the English versus the Japanese language, trying to, in meetings and stuff, them talking, you had no idea what they were saying. And he lost weight. He really came back looking not too healthy. But anyway, that was his job. And they were, that's who he was still working at that. When he died, it was called Zexel. That's who he was working for then. But it was the same building that I had worked in when the only job I ever had, but it was a different company and everything. So anyway, that's where he was working when he died. Fred and I Jerry was born June the 30th, 1961, and Carol was born February the 12th, 1964. Unfortunately, and then Jerry and Elaine, he married Elaine, and they have 2 children, Kevin and Laura. And of course, Mick and Carol have Rob and Bethany. Vacation-wise, I remember a next-door neighbor to my grandmother and we went with, his name was Rex, her name was Nell, and they have a son named Freddie. And we went with them to Niagara Falls, so that was a real special time of vacation, going that far away. And then as far as our family, going to Florida, Disney World, I know that was during high school days I know Jerry's driver's permit was in the mail when we got back from that vacation. That's how I always remember the year, sort of the year of that. And that was interesting because at that time Disney World was nothing like it is now, but still it was quite a trip down there. And so, you know. I was at home. Fred, I remember, was in the airport of Cleveland, Ohio. And he called me out on the phone. Yeah, I was 2094 East Whitmer in Decatur. Yeah. I was a stay-at-home mom with Jerry and Carol, even through their high school days. A neighbor of mine, she did from cassettes, one of the funeral homes in Decatur, Dawson and Wyckoff, which is the funeral home we have always used, which my family will use because everything is taken care of through them. She did the funeral sermons that were recorded, and she typed up from the cassettes the sermon, and then that sermon was put into a book for the family. And she did that, my neighbor and friend Barb, and it got to be where there was more than she really could handle, and I started doing the same thing. She lived 6 houses from me, 5-6 houses up the hill from me, and we both did that. So I did that, and then we both gave that up. There was a time when they decided not to do that anymore, and so therefore neither one was doing that. And I had volunteered a little bit at the church, and then one of the secretaries was leaving at the church that I belonged to from the time I moved from Decatur to currently. And so the main secretary was a good friend of mine, and she'd asked me if I would have any interest, and I said, yeah, maybe I would. It's part-time. So I took that position, and then eventually she left and went to work for one of our church members that had been voted in to be regional superintendent of schools, David Cooprider. And he didn't have a secretary, so he approached her about being his secretary, and it took her a while to make a decision. And finally she thought, I've always been a church secretary, maybe it's time for a change. So she resigned and went to work for David, and I moved up to church secretary, and I was church secretary for 20 years till I retired. So now and then I just volunteer from time to time in the office still. Tabernacle Baptist. I attended there, well, and it was 1949 we went to Decatur, but I didn't really join until 1951, so when I actually joined, I think, was a year. So, but that's the only church I ever attended after I moved there. Well, I did get in trouble once. I always went in the summertime, visited my dad in Wood River, and in between seeing him throughout the year, from time to time, he would come up to the farm and see me, and like I say, he always supported me financially every month. And my stepmother worked at a library in Wood River, so she was always not home either. But I would go, in the summertime I would go. And I was on my own some down there while she would be at work. And I went to the pool one time. And somehow or another, I got lost coming back from the swimming pool. And a policeman ended up bringing me back to the house. So I do remember that, yeah. So I rode in a police car. Those grandparents was Grandpa and Grandma Elmore, and then I had a special uncle that didn't marry until many, many years, recent years, and he lived on the farm, and they lived in the Donaldson area, very near to the house in which I was born at, and I drove by that house many a times going to visit them on the farm. So I do know where the house is, and it's still standing. It's a little white house, but they're all deceased now, so I had no reason to go in by that area. I guess that house, I've been told, has been torn down, so I don't even want to go by there and not see that house standing. So I had good grandparents and a good aunt and uncles and a good dad. Even though I didn't live with him all my life, he was still my dad and there for me, and a stepmother. But never had any brothers or sisters. They didn't have any children, so. Favorite food? My favorite pie is lemon. Otherwise, I'm not a picky eater. There's very few things I don't like. Now I'm more limited what I eat, being diabetic, and did have a cholesterol problem at one time, so I some of the things I really like, I don't eat as often as I would like to, but usually I can find something that I can eat and no problem at all. Just my limitations on the amounts, if it's something high carbs and that type of stuff. Boots Randolph was my saxophone player. I kept thinking, when Carol Mick was going to be moving down here, oh, Boots Randolph, and then he gave it up. He came to Decatur a couple times, and I saw him in person 3 times, I guess. 2 times at Milliken, 1 time at Taylorville, Nashville North. That was a night place, and he came down there. I've got a picture taken down there with him, and he was my saxophone. I liked Boots Randolph, yeah. Well, I remember when Carol was learning to drive, we had just half a block from our house, there was a church, or there still is a church. It's still there, very active church. And I remember we had a green Toyota. That's what the kids both learned to drive on. And I just remember one time when Carol was learning to drive, Jerry was going to take her up to let her drive some with him instead of Dad and I. And he took her up there and let her drive up there. Or I don't know whether she drove up there. I think maybe he drove up there. But anyway, she had to drive back home. And that was the first time that she had driven back down from like that distance back to the house. I remember that, him and her going up there, and she wasn't aware of the fact. I think they were just going to drive around the parking lot. Instead, he got her back on them, told her she had to drive back on that street to get back to the house. I just remember that little instance. But as far as anything special, Carol was a pom-pom girl in high school, so naturally we went to all the games with her where she was a pom-pom person. And Jerry played football a little bit at one time, and baseball, and but they both graduated from the same high school, Eisenhower, and we had neighborhood kids that were their ages, and our driveway was one of the bases on playing ball in the street, and the boy behind us, he was Jerry's age, and the boy, his brother was Carol's age, and then 2-3 doors up was another boy that was Carol's age, and the girl was a year older than Jerry. And so our neighborhood had a lot of kids their age, and there was always kids playing in the street in front of our house and everything. We had a good neighborhood. We really did. Mm-hmm. Well, basically, over 79 years, I feel I've been blessed with health. I mean, I haven't had cancer or anything that any type of surgery, I've always recovered from, and I don't think I've really had that many issues health-wise. I mean, I've had some surgeries, but nothing that, was a matter of time of healing or recovering that I haven't recovered from. So I think I've been blessed, and mentally, I don't think I'm a basket case. I may from time to time forget something, but basically I think my memory's pretty good. I'm able to be on my own. I did move 3 years ago from my house to a condo, so I don't have the maintenance issues and things like that, which has helped family members not having to. Jerry's my computer person, that he bails me out, and now he can really bail me out easier than having to drive an hour from Bloomington to Decatur, because he's got a setup called Team something where he has access to everything on my computer on his, so he can on the phone walk me through an issue and save trips. And so that has, and as far as being in my home, I still have contact with my one neighbor, close neighbors. They lived on 4th Drive when we moved there, and they're still there. But otherwise, the neighborhood has completely changed. And but while I was still on my own, I had a good yard person, and he, after I quit doing it myself, I used to do it myself until I had some foot surgery. But I had a very dependable yard person. He was good. And then I had a young boy that usually did my snow. I had a snowblower, used it myself, but the recent years I was there, I did have someone do it. And so I was able to maintain and keep the house all those years until 3 years ago. So now I'm in a cul-de-sac with 11 other families and adjusting to the change, but that's okay. I still have enough room for everybody when they come and stay all night, and we still can sit at the dining room table just like we did on 4th Drive, same positions, and so it's worked out okay. Yeah. Well, I think I've been blessed with my 4 grandkids so far. None of them's been they haven't been on drugs, and they've all been good students in high school, through college. Rob's about ready to finish his master's. Kevin is about ready to finish his 2nd year of law school in Virginia. He's got 1 more year. Laura's just trying to check out other colleges where she's going to go on with her master's. And Bethany's just about finished her 1st year. So they've all done very well in college, and I'm very proud of every one of them. And I'm sure they'll all be faced with challenges, but I think they're all level-headed, and hopefully they'll all continue to make good choices in their lives. Mm-hmm. Grandma. Yeah, they all call me Grandma. Mm-hmm.